space. And with stereophonic recording, the feeling of space and perspective is brought to you.
Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Silent Feedback Podcast. I'm your host Josh, and for today's episode, I am going to be doing a podcast series I like to call Double Feature. Now, this is a podcast series where I choose two films that I feel are related in some way. Either that's thematically related, they have similar genres, the same director, same writer, same cast member, or any other reason that I feel like these films on paper should have some relationship to each other. And then I watch both films, I review them in one podcast, and at the end I talk about any relationship between the films that I could find. And I feel like this is a good way for me to first, work on my reviewing skills, especially for movies, and just my analysis skills of, watch these movies, analyzing them, and seeing if I can find relationships between them. And these could be films of different genres, different directors, or different cast members, but there's something that, draws them together. And for today, the two films that I am reviewing are Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, which is a Coen Brothers film, and Three Kings, which is a David O. Russell film. Now, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Is a film I have actually never seen before, so this is my first time watching the film, and this is going to be my first review of it. And Three Kings is a film I have seen before in the past, but I saw it again recently to refresh myself for this review. So I'm going to start off with Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? In terms of genre, this is considered a music-filled comedy drama film. It was directed by the Coen Brothers. Officially, Joel Coen is credited. This is because the Directors Guild, they did not allow multiple director credits unless the directors were an established duo. Now, up until 2003, the Coen Brothers were considered an established duo from the Directors Guild, so they weren't allowed to have the director credit of the Coen Brothers. And then after 2003, they were officially given that ability to label their films directed by the Coen Brothers. And since then, that is what they have done. But up until 2003, what they did is the director of the film was always Joel Coen, and the producer of the film was always Ethan Coen. So that's how it happened in this film, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? It was written by both Coen Brothers, and the film itself is based on a poem by Homer. This is a famous poem. It's called The Odyssey. And the cast of the film, the leading actor of this film is George Clooney. You also have John Turturro, Tim Blake Nelson, John Goodman, and Holly Hunter are kind of the main cast members. In terms of cinematography, cinematography of this film is done by Roger Deakins, who actually worked on most of the Coen Brothers films, including Barton Fink, Fargo, The Big Lebowski, and No Country for Old Men. Now, the music on this film was done by T-Bone Burnett. He's a producer, guitarist, and songwriter who's most famously known for being the guitarist in Bob Dylan's band during the 1970s. This film was released in the United States on December 22nd, 2000, and the budget on this film was $26 million, while the box office, it made $72 million. In terms of reception, critical reception, it got a 78% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's based on 154 reviews. And in terms of awards, the Coen Brothers were nominated for an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. Roger Deakins was also nominated for an Academy Award for Best Cinematography. Both of them did not win, but the movie did win. The movie soundtrack did win 2 Grammy Awards. The first award was actually Album of the Year, which is the biggest award given out at the Grammys, and the second award was Best Compilation Soundtrack Album for a Motion Picture. The movie was also nominated for a Best Motion Picture for a Comedy or Musical at the Golden Globes. It did not win, and then George Clooney did win a Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Comedy or Musical. The title of the film is actually a reference to a 1941 Preston Sturges film called Sullivan's Travels. In this film, the protagonist of the film, he's a film director who wants to make a film about the Great Depression called Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And which for him will serve as a commentary on the modern condition, stark realism, and the problems of the average man. And in this movie, the Coen Brothers actually pay direct homage to that film and present a nearly identical scene from Sullivan Travels in this film. This is the scene where Delmar and Everett are in the theater watching a movie, and the prisoners show up behind them to watch the same movie. This is a nearly identical scene to the scene from the 1941 Preston Sturges film Sullivan Travels. And for this film, it's a period piece taking place in 1930s Mississippi. So the Coen Brothers wanted a old-timey, sepia-tinted, dusty look for this film. And Roger Deakins spent over 2 months working on turning the lush green Mississippi landscape where this movie was filmed into the burnt, old-timey yellow sepia look that you notice when you watch this film. And he did this through desaturation and via digital color correction. And this became the first film ever to be digitally color corrected in its entirety, which is just an interesting fact I found. In terms of the plot, so the film starts off, you see these prisoners working a chain gang in Mississippi, years 1937, and you notice 3 prisoners are escaping this chain gang. The first prisoner is Ulysses Everett McGill. He's played by George Clooney. You have Pete. He's played by John Turturro. Then you have Delma O'Donnell, and he's played by Tim Blake Nelson. Now, these are your 3 main characters for the film, and they are on a journey to escape the chain gang and find a treasure that Everett has told Pete and Delmar about so they can all become rich. So in my opinion, this was a really great opening scene, great establishing shot to show this time period. You can clearly see that sepia tinted film that I talked about before. It really makes you feel like you're there in the 1930s during the Great Depression. I like how the prisoners were dressed up in that authentic black and white prisoner gear that really brings you back to that time. And also I like how most of the prisoners were African American, which I feel like is a accurate portrayal of that time where the prison systems in the South were mainly filled by African Americans due to the racial prejudices that they faced during that time. And also I like how it showed that the prisoners were singing while they worked, which again is very accurate to that time, and also gives a great introduction to the theme of this film, which is music, and how music is driving the entire film throughout, even though this film does not feel like a musical. So the 3 main characters, after they escape the prison, they get a lift from this old black blind man who's driving a hand cart on the railway. and he gives them a ride, and he gives them some advice. He tells them that he foretells their future. He says that they're going to find the fortune, but not the one that they seek. This gave me a very kind of like storybook feel, kind of this feel of like, okay, this is an old time story, which makes sense because it's based on the Odyssey by Homer, which is a very old story. So I kind of that Princess Bride feel where they're kind of giving a storybook thing, and a lot of people talk about this as an example for what Spike Lee popularized as the film trope, the magical Negro, where you have an older African American figure giving advice or foretelling, giving special insight to white protagonist. So after they get this advice from this old man, they are escaping the sheriff, and they find a car. So they drive in the car to Everett's house, this cabin, which is where the treasure is. On the way there, they notice a hitchhiker who's a young black man. They pick him up. His name is Tommy Johnson, and he has a guitar with him. And he claims that he just sold his soul to the devil in exchange to play the guitar really good. And he wants to play the guitar really good so he can make money. And he found an opportunity to play for a radio station that's going to pay him good money. Now, this Tommy character, Tommy Johnson, is actually based on the real life musician named Tommy Johnson. He was a famous blues musician from the 20s and 30s, who legend says he sold his soul to the devil at Locos Crossroad to attain guitar success, musical success. Again, this was kind of a legend given to a lot of black guitarists of the time, blues guitarists of the time, including Robert Johnson, who had a similar story about that, and even the song he made, Crossroads, is kind of, people view that as a reference to that, which Eric Clapton covered in the 60s and became a huge hit. But anyway, back to the story. So the three of them with Tommy, they go to the radio station because they hear Tommy tells them they can make some good money, and the radio host is a blind guy, and they say a lie. They say, oh yeah, we're this big band, we'll do this song and you can pay us. And so they perform the song under the name the Soggy Bottom Boys, with Tommy playing guitar, and they sound amazing, which it was surprising to me. I thought they were going to sound bad, but they actually sounded amazing. Through research, I found out that was actually not the actors singing. They got professional singers and they dubbed them. But they sing the song really well. The radio host likes it. He pays them, and then they leave. And that song that they sang went out to the waves in Mississippi at the time, the radio waves, and became a huge major hit in Mississippi. But the problem was, record producers and studios, they wanted to sign them, but no one knew who the Soggy Bottom Boys were because the radio host is blind, and they left so fast. So it's interesting in this journey. They're going for money, but if they would just stayed and they would realize that their singing was actually successful. But anyway, I really enjoyed this scene. There's also a little part at the end where they run into this politician. His name's Poppy, and he's running for, I think it's mayor of this town, or possibly governor. I'm not really sure. And, it kind of shows this political theme that kind of runs through with the music of, the Deep South, and how the political climate was of that time. And you see that this politician kind of doesn't care for the lower class people, and he's trying to sell his message. His goal is to win. So there's that little scene there. But in terms of this scene, the theme of this movie is about music, and I really enjoyed the music in this scene. I loved the background vocals, and this is just a really great song. So then, the three people, and the three main characters, Everett, Pete, and Delmar, they start on their journey to Everett's cabin for the treasure. And throughout this journey, they part ways with Tommy, and they have to get rid of their car because the police are after them. They go to Delmar's cousin's house, and he rats them out to the police, so they're on the run from that. They run to Babyface Nelson, who in real life was an actual gangster from the 30s and 40s, and they run to him. They help him rob a bank, kind of on accident, just kind of catches up with them. They also run to this church who's singing, and especially Delmar. He's kind of intrigued by this church and the message that they're saying, and so he gets baptized, and he says he's free of all sin now. Everett is kind of skeptical of that, and Pete is kind of the confrontational one. So when you break down the characters, Everett's kind of like the smart one who, feels like he's the leader of the group. Pete is the one that's very argumentative and gets into it a lot with Everett and Delmar. And then Delmar is kind of like the lovable dumb one. And there's a scene after that where Pete sees these three women bathing in the lake, and he's infatuated with them. They actually drug all three of them, and when Pete and when Delmar and Everett wake up, Pete is missing. And Delmar sees a toad come out from Pete's clothes, because Pete's clothes are there, and he believes the women put a spell of some kind. Maybe he thinks of the women as some type of witch or sirens, and they turned Pete into this toad. So Delmar grabs his toad and takes it with them on his journey. Now, when they get into town, they actually get robbed by this Bible salesman. His name's Big Dan, and he's played by John Goodman, who I thought did really good in this role. And so he robs them, and he kills the toad, who Delmar believes to be Pete. So it's a very emotional scene for Delmar, but there's definitely a humorous tone taken within that emotion. In terms of these scenes, the scene with the three women, I felt like was kind of weird. It made me kind of feel disconnected from the story, and I didn't really know what was happening. In terms of the Babyface Nelson scene, it was very fast, so I didn't really have a lot of opinion on that. Plus, it kind of paid off a little bit at the end, so that scene's fine. And then the Big Dan scene, again, comes back towards the end of the film. Overall, this is kind of like the middle part of the film where there's a little bit of dull parts, especially like the baptism parts can kind of be a little dull. But overall, I like the struggle and the journey as they go through all this tribulation so they can get the treasure that's in Everett's cabin. So they finally arrive at Everett's hometown where the treasure is. And Everett confronts his wife, Penny, who's played by Holly Hunter. She's engaged to a new man, and she told all her daughters that Everett had died. So Everett's obviously upset by this. He confronts her. He tells her, "Why did you lie to our daughters?" He actually gets in a fight with her fiance, which he loses. Later on, Everett and Delmar, they go to the movie theater to watch a movie because Everett's upset. And then while they're at the movie theater, a group of prisoners enter the theater, and they notice that Pete is with the group of prisoners. So they realize now that, Pete's alive and he wasn't the toad. So they decide, well, we need to break Pete out of prison. So later that night, they free Pete from his cell, and they tell him, and Pete tells them that he was tortured, and he gave the police, specifically the sheriff, the location of Everett's treasure because he was tortured. And he said that the three women, they drugged him, and they gave him over to the police. So now the police know about Everett's treasure. But the twist is, Everett confesses at this point that there was no treasure. is something he made up. He lied to Pete and Delmar. And the reason he did this is they were in a chain gang together, which means the three of them were chained up together. And Everett received a letter from his wife that she had met another man and she was going to marry him. So he wanted to escape to stop his wife from getting married. And so he created this lie for Pete and Delmar that there was some treasure that he knew about, and to get them to escape with him so he could stop his wife from getting married. Again, in terms of the acting, I think it was really well done in these scenes. They're very comical, but there is some emotion to this, especially the scene where Everett confesses that he was lying. I love the facial expressions from Pete and Delmar. I think Tim Nelson Blake, specifically did a really good job of using his facial expressions to really act during those scenes, because him and John Turturro did not have a lot of lines. But you kind of get a picture of who these characters are. Everett is the one who thinks he's smarter than the rest of the group. He thinks he's better than them. He uses this fancy hair products, while Pete and Delmar are just country boys who, Pete is very confrontational. I feel like there's something in his past where he gets lied to a lot. His cousin turned him in. And Delmar is just very innocent, but also very dumb. And it just makes you feel like you get this picture that Everett's a leader and he just feels like he's above them. And I like that they showed that Everett isn't perfect and that he lied, and he admitted to that, and it made the three of them closer. It made Everett into a more likable character. So after this whole confrontation, obviously Pete's mad and they're arguing, and they stumble upon a KKK rally. And they see that Tommy, who is the young black guitar player who played with them when they were the Soggy Bottom Boys, Tommy is actually got captured by the KKK, and they're planning to hang Tommy. So now they decide, okay, we have to save Tommy. And so they dress up as KKK members. They steal one of the KKK members' outfits, go to the rally, and they try to break out Tommy. Now, Big Dan, who is John Goodman's character who robbed them, he is a KKK Klansman, and he notices that they are the people he robbed. They don't belong here. So he removes their hoods, and everyone sees that, oh, they're not supposed to be part of the KKK. So chaos ensues. The Grand Wizard of the KKK, the leader, he's revealed to be Homer Stokes, who was the candidate that's running against Pappy O'Donnell in the state election. Now, Pappy O'Donnell was the candidate that they ran to when they left the recording studio that I mentioned earlier. So throughout this movie, there's a political undertone, and they show this, Homer is for the reform movement, while Pappy is more traditionalist. So they show this political intrigue beneath all this, and you're revealed at this point that Homer is actually a KKK member. So all this chaos happens. Finally, they manage to get away with Tommy. They cut down this burning cross. It lands on Big Dan, who presumably dies or gets injured, and they escape. I really like that they risk their life to save Tommy, someone who they didn't know really well, but they had a genuine connection with. I think it's interesting that they include KKK representation in this movie, because obviously that was a big thing that happened on a daily basis in the South in Mississippi during the 1930s this time. But the movie's kind of a comedy, so I was kind of surprised that they included that KKK member, especially that the person running for office was a KKK member and the leader, which again feels very realistic for that time. I like that Big Dan came back and kind of paid off that he's the villain, and he gets his just due when the cross lands on him. So after Everett, Pete, and Delmar escape, Pete is still mad at Everett, same with Delmar. But Everett, he apologizes and he convinces them to help him win his wife back. So they agree and they sneak into the Stokes campaign dinner, which is where she and her fiance are attending that night, and disguise themselves as musicians. They go up on stage and they perform their hit song as the Soggy Bottom Boys, which the crowd gives a huge reaction to because they've listened to their songs on the radio. They don't know who they are, so now they finally get to see them. Homer recognizes this is the same group that he saw just this night at the KKK rally that he tried to capture, and he demands that they be arrested. He admits to the crowd that basically he's a Klansman and he saw them at this rally and they should be arrested. The crowd turns on him and they want to hear the music, they want to hear the Soggy Bottom Boys, and so they run him out of the dinner. And Pappy O'Donnell is also at the dinner, and he uses this opportunity to go up on stage and endorse the Soggy Bottom Boys, which is very popular, and he grants them full pardons, and so he becomes the number one in the race, while Homer is just kind of is thrown out and is presumed that he lost the race. Again, I like how this is kind of like the climax of the film, and it shows that music is at the heart of this film. And I love the singing during this section, just the joyousness of all these people just so happy to hear this music, especially as they're going through the Great Depression, the poverty and classism issues that they're experiencing. Music was a great distraction for them, and they all seem to really enjoy the Soggy Bottom Boys. And just overall the music was just really, really good in this film. So after that, Penny leaves her fiance, who actually was the campaign manager for Homer, and she leaves him for Everett, and she says, "I'll marry you if you can get your original ring." Now the original ring is actually in Everett's cabin. So the next day the group, they travel to Everett's cabin to get the ring, and when they arrive there, they get ambushed by the police. Now, the reason the police are there is because Pete, when he was tortured, he told the police, if you remember, the treasure location, and he said it was in Everett's cabin. So the police are there staking out the place, waiting for them to come for the treasure. So the police come, they arrest them, and they attempt to hang them. They tell them you're gonna hang. So the four of them are on their knees praying to God, and Everett's praying to God to get him out of this. And after he finishes his prayer, you hear this noise of water, and the whole valley becomes flooded, and everyone gets taken out. They get saved. They take off their chains and everything. They're saved. Tommy's saved, so the four of them are saved. Everett even finds the ring that was in the desk, and he goes to Penny and he gives her the ring. And Penny says, "This is actually my aunt's ring, and she's not gonna marry Everett without the actual ring." And so then Everett gets mad. He asks her where she put the ring, and she forgets. And the movie ends. I like this ending because at least that last part, it was very Coen Brothers-ish for me, kind of sarcastic, and I like how it kind of had a twist on the ending there. But in terms of like the whole section where they go back, the police are there, they get hanged, it felt kind of rushed to me. Also the flood just felt like kind of a MacGuffin to kind of make it have a happy ending. And honestly, I would have been fine if the movie just ended after the concert in the dinner. I felt like that was just a perfect ending. They saved the day. The racist mayor's taken out. He gets his girl back, or his wife back. So it felt like a perfect ending. but they add this second part on, really just to tie up the loose ends of the police, because you kind of forget about the police and the whole chase, honestly, because it's been like 30 or so minutes. So I understand why they did the end. It was just wasn't my favorite ending to a film. But yeah, that's the film. I'm gonna give some of my overall thoughts. First off, the music in this film is amazing. I'm not a huge fan of musicals, and this really didn't feel like a musical to me. It just felt like a film that was just driven by music. Music was its main theme. It really helped the plot go along, and it didn't hinder the plot. It didn't interrupt talking points, which I know a lot of times happens in musicals. It really supplemented the storyline, the plot of this movie. Also, this movie is set in 1930s Mississippi during the Great Depression. So it deals with poverty, it deals with racism, classism, politics, Southern culture just in general. It's just, you find that throughout this whole film. And I really, when you're watching this, you feel like you're in that setting. So I really appreciate the directing work from the Coen Brothers to really make it feel like you are there in that setting with them, the Soggy Bottom Boys as they're on this journey. The acting in this film, again, very, very good acting. George Clooney did a great job leading this film. Again, it's not a role where he's given a lot of lines. A lot of the acting is reactionary. Same thing with Tim Blake Nelson and John Turturro. They're given even less lines, but again, they're just, especially Tim Blake Nelson, his facial acting, and he just becomes off as this very sympathetic character that you can attach to. Tim Blake Nelson's a very good, character actor, and he really shines out in this film, in my opinion. And the personalities just mesh well together. Like I said, you have Everett, who's kind of the smart one, leader of the group. You have Pete, who's the kind of confrontational one, negative one, and you have Tim Blake Nelson, who's the positive one, kind of the dumb, aloof one of the group, who's very country, but he has just a very likableness about him. Complaint I have about the film, the middle part I felt was kind of boring. There's parts that felt a little bit like filler. Again, like I said, the church going scene where he gets baptized, the scene with the women, the 3 women who drugged them, that again didn't really need to be there. I did enjoy the twist that there was no treasure, because that really came for a surprise for me. I was expecting some type of treasure. And then I really like the scene when they saved Tommy from the KKK. But overall, my favorite scene was when the Soggy Bottom Boys performed at the end, because it felt like a movie, adventure movie, a coming of age movie, where there's just the ending scene where they perform the concert. And I love scenes like that in movies, and this one did a really good job with that. I love the crowd's reaction to everything, and I love that the racist guy, his justice is served. He gets his just due. In terms of the ending, it wasn't my favorite ending to a movie. Again, I felt like they could have ended it at that the concert scene, but they just kind of kept going. But I did like that last scene between George Clooney and Holly Hunter's characters. Felt kind of like a Fargo, Raising Arizona type Coen Brothers scene. But overall, cinematography was beautiful, music was great, the acting was great, and then I really liked the overall story. So my rating for this film would be an 8 out of 10. And in terms of recommendations, I would recommend this film for, obviously fans of the Coen Brothers' other movies, if you haven't seen this one. Just fans of folk music in general, fans of period pieces, especially period pieces taking place during the Great Depression, during the 30s and 40s. Man, this is just a really, really good film that I've never seen before, but I'm happy that I saw. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a film I would recommend to watch. If you just want, it has a good ending, so it's not that negative. It's just a good, really good feeling film. So yeah, that was Oh Brother, Where Art Thou review. And next I'm going to do the Three Kings review. Now, Three Kings, in terms of genre, this is considered a war comedy. Three Kings was directed by David O. Russell, who also directed films like Flirting with Disaster, I Heart Huckabees, The Fighter, Silver Linings Playbook, among other films. It was written by David O. Russell, and the story was by John Ridley. Now, there's kind of an interesting history about this story by credit. So John Ridley originally wrote the screenplay called Spoils of War, and Warner Brothers bought this screenplay. They showed it to David O. Russell with the title and a short description which read, "Heist set in the Gulf War." Now, from this title and that description, he was inspired to write his script for Three Kings. He claimed that he never read Ridley's script, he just saw the title and that description, but he took the idea of those things to write this script. And so when Ridley received the script, he was mad because he didn't get any input on the script. They never asked him to come in during the filming process. He felt like he was completely shut out by Russell, and he got no credit for the script. So Warner Brothers, agreed to a deal which gave Ridley this story by credit, but to this day, Ridley's still really unhappy with this experience, and he hasn't worked with David O. Russell since. In terms of production, it was produced by Charles Roven, Paul Junger-Witt, and Edward L. McDonald. The cast, the leading actor in this movie is George Clooney. You also have Mark Wahlberg, Ice Cube, Spike Jonze, and Jamie Kennedy. In terms of the cinematographer was Newton Thomas Siegel, and the music was done by Carter Burnwell. Interesting fact about Carter Burnwell that kind of connects the films. Carter actually did the music for all of the Coen Brothers films except Oh Brother, Where Art Thou and Inside Llewyn Davis. So it's kind of interesting that I didn't know that going into this, but it's interesting that the person who did the music for Three Kings usually is like the main music person for Coen Brothers films, but he did not do Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which is just kind of interesting. So the release date for this film, this was released in the United States on October 1st, 1999. The budget was $48 million, and in the box office it made $107.7 million. In terms of reception, this film got a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 128 reviews, so a lot of critics like this film. It was filmed in Arizona, California, and Mexico. The main extras that were in this film were actually, let me repeat that. Many extras that were in this film were actually played by Iraqi refugees, which is really interesting because this film deals with the Gulf War and it takes place in Iraq, and it deals with Iraqi refugees in the film. So it's really cool that most of the extras they got were actual Iraqi refugees that had moved to United States. Also, this is the first film that Spike Jonze had ever acted in. If you don't know Spike Jonze is a director. He got started in the skateboarding world. He directed some skateboarding videos. He also co-founded the company Girls Skateboarding in 1993. He also directed music videos for bands like Sonic Youth. I know he did the 100% music video for them. He did Beastie Boys, Weezer, REM, and one of my favorite music videos of all time, The Far Side's Drop. Far Side's alternative hip-hop group from the 90s, and their music video Drop is really cool because it was filmed backwards and then reversed. So it's like a really like just weird effect on this music video that if you haven't seen, I definitely recommend for you to check out. So he's a director, and his first feature film was actually Being John Malkovich, and that film was actually released in the US in the same month, in the same year as this film, Three Kings. So he was basically he's never acted before, non-experienced actor who's a director, and he was friends with David O. Russell, and David O. Russell got him in this film because he wanted someone unexperienced for this role, which is kind of interesting. Also, some interesting production notes. Russell for this film had some trouble with the production company in the studio because he did some unconventional things. First, he used handheld cameras and Steadicam shots in this film to give it this kind of journalistic kind of documentary feel to the film, which makes it really unique. And the editing on this film, you can tell, is just very jaggering and just very this feels very progressive for the time. Just feels very different than normal action movies. Also, all the explosions in this film were filmed in one shot as opposed to being covered by multiple cameras. So usually when you're filming explosions, you have multiple cameras set up. You can cut between the cameras to get these dynamic shots. All the explosions in this film were actually shot with one camera on one shot. So it made the explosions in David O. Russell's words feel more real and less like a generic action picture of the time. Now, interesting production note for this is David O. Russell and George Clooney actually got into a physical fight on set while filming this. So basically, David O. Russell has a reputation in Hollywood, not just in this film, but in most of the films he's done. This is just a reputational thing that he's kind of a jerk. You know, he yells and screams at cast members, at extras, at crew members. He's a perfectionist, and this gets on a lot of people's nerves. So while filming this movie, he was yelling and screaming at extras and crew members for making mistakes, not doing stuff right. And one day, Russell claims that he was showing an extra how to throw Ice Cube's character, who Ice Cube's the actor in this film, to the ground. And he was showing him how he wanted to do it because the extra kept messing up, and he was yelling at him. And Clooney came in, and he thought that Russell was actually physically fighting this extra or violently throwing him on the ground, bullying him. So Clooney came in and started arguing with Russell, defending the extra, defending other crew members who for weeks were being yelled at and screamed at, and this led to a physical fight. Now, what happened after that fight was just more yelling. Eventually they were separated. But interestingly enough, the second assistant director, his name was Paul Bernard, he was so fed up with Russell's antics and Clooney and him fighting that he actually placed down his camera and walked off set, effectively quitting the movie. And then since filming this film, Clooney said that he would never work with Russell again, and up to this point, right now in 2022, he has not worked with Russell since. Now let me get into the plot of the film and kind of my thoughts on the film in general. So this film starts off in 1991, after the end of the Gulf War in Iraq. Because the war is ending, film starts off, you see soldiers celebrating, partying, and complaining about not getting any action. Because the Gulf War, in terms of, if you compare it to wars that happened in the United States, this is a war where there wasn't a lot of shooting and gunfire compared to other wars. Obviously there was, but compared to other wars, there was a lot of soldiers who went over there who actually saw no action. So these soldiers are complaining about not seeing any action, and then you see U.S. Army Reserve Sergeant First Class Troy Barlaw, who's played by Mark Wahlberg, his character. You see him and the other soldiers not sure. They see an Iraqi soldier. They're not sure if they should shoot him or not. They're not sure what the rules of engagement are. The war is over technically, and then Mark Wahlberg shoots him and kills him, and everyone's just celebrating and super happy and all this stuff. But you see that Mark Wahlberg is conflicted because ethically he didn't know if he just did the right thing or not. So after that, it goes on, and you see that they need to search these Iraqi officers that they captured. And so him, Mark Wahlberg's character, and Troy Barlar's best friend, his name is Private First Class Conrad Vig, he's played by Spike Jonze. They find this map in the butt of an Iraqi officer. So he hid it in his butt, and they strip him down. They grab this map, and they don't know what the map's for. They go to their staff sergeant, who his name is Chief Elgin, and he's played by Ice Cube, and Ice Cube helps them translate this map. So now let me just talk a little bit about these scenes. I really like the creative edits that are happening. I kind of mentioned it earlier. The filmmaking of this film is just so well done. The cinematography, just the way that they edit and the way that it's shot with the kind of shaky single camera, handheld, that really gives that documentary feel. Also, I love the contrast of these soldiers celebrating the kill that Troy did on that soldier, while Troy is really conflicted, and you can see in his face he doesn't know if he just did the right thing or made a mistake, or how ethically he feels about this, because he wanted to kill someone, he wanted to get some action, but now that he's gotten it, he doesn't give him the feeling that he thought that it would. Also, I like how it just shows kind of a realistic feel of these soldiers who were probably there for months on end, not getting any action. They're tired. So finally, when the war's over, them celebrating, partying, that just felt very realistic for me. And I've seen it in other, military movies where, war is just so horrible. It's like, you get when war's actually over, they're just celebrating and throwing parties and stuff. So that felt very realistic to me. So then you meet Major Archie Gates, who's played by George Clooney. He is a U.S. Army Special Forces soldier, and the first scene you see him, he's having sex with Judy Greer's character, who has a very small role in the movie, but basically she's a reporter. And so they have sex, whatever, and then his sergeant comes off, or like his boss or whatever, comes to him, is mad at him for having sex with her because that's inappropriate, and also that he's supposed to be assigned to this other TV reporter who's like the rival of Judy Greer's character. Her name is Adriana Cruz, and he's supposed to escort her around Iraq to help her covering stories that she wants to cover. So, Gates is confrontational, but he agrees to that, and Adriana tells him about the story that Saddam Hussein is hiding gold billions that he stole from Kuwait in his bunkers, and he has this gold there, and he's hiding it there. So Gates hears about this, and he thinks, well, let me steal the gold. Like, I want to get that gold. So he overhears that Troy had found this map, or this document, this map document, wherever he doesn't know what it is. So he goes to Troy's trailer, and that's where he meets Chief, Troy, and Conrad. Again, Chief is Ice Cube's character, Troy is Mark Wahlberg's character, and then Conrad is Spike Jonze's character. And they're looking at this map. Gates tells them that this is a map of Saddam Hussein's bunkers near Karabal, which contain the gold, and all four of them decide, okay, we're going to steal this together and then split the profits. And Gates needs to keep Adriana off his back, so he gets this specialist. His name is Walter Wogman, played by Jamie Kennedy. to kind of guide her around Iraq and send her on false leads around Iraq, so she's distracted. Again, first thing I kind of noticed with these group of scenes is, this is one of Judy Greer's earlier roles where it's a small role where she has sex with him, and she's not really seen throughout the movie, but I thought that was kind of interesting. I like how right away you can see Gates is just done with this whole war thing. He's numb to everything. He's in special forces. He talks about killing other Iraqi soldiers. So for him, he's seen and done war, and he's just kind of dumb and numb to it. While you see Conrad, again played by Spike Jonze's character, he's kind of the jokester of the group. He's not really taking this war very seriously. He's the one that's celebrating when Troy kills that Iraqi soldier. And then you have Chief, played by Ice Cube, who's like the very level-headed one of the group. He seems like a very smart, capable officer, and he clashes a lot with Conrad because Conrad's kind of the joker of the group. And then you have Troy, who is kind of the main protagonist of this film, who you see is struggling with the ethics of what he did by killing that officer. It's still bothering him. And Jamie Kennedy's character is kind of the comic relief, and you don't really see him, just kind of sporadically throughout the movie when they go to scenes with him and the reporter. So anyway, the next day, the four of them travel to the bunkers on the map, and they find the gold billions. And when they get to the place, they see all these, Iraqi people there, just struggling, thirsty, hungry, and they need help, but they're ignoring all of them because they need to get that gold. And they find, they go in there, there's Iraqi soldiers outside, but they're ignoring them because they don't care because the war's over. They're fine with them taking the gold, because they're trying to deal with the prisoners and the people who are opposing Saddam. So there's this political conflict that's happening where the Iraqi soldiers are trying to control all these prisoners and people who are talking anti-Saddam, people who are against the Iraqi soldiers. They're trying to gather them off and control them, while these soldiers are just going for the gold. So they allow them to get the gold. And while they're getting the gold, they see that there are Iraqi prisoners that are being held, and one of them, his name is Amir Abdullah, he's actually being tortured. So he sees this, and again you see Troy kind of ethically feeling like this is something I should intervene with, I should help them, but he knows he can't because there's a ceasefire, and the Iraqi soldiers in the United States, they're not fighting each other. So they got all the gold. The Iraqi soldiers are helping them put it into their van. So then, Gates, Troy, Conrad, and Chief, they can leave with the gold. So they're about to leave, and then they hear Amir's wife pleading with them to not leave. Don't leave all of us here, these Iraqi people, these anti-Saddam Iraqi people specifically, because as soon as you leave, as soon as America leaves, it's going to be like old times. They're going to abuse us again. They're going to take away all our rights, and they're going to control us. And, all of them, especially Troy, knows that this is true, but he can't do anything because there's a ceasefire, and he knows he can't do anything. Even though ethically it feels wrong that they're stealing this gold for their own purposes, their selfish purposes, while all these innocent people are suffering. So then what happens is the Iraqi soldier actually murders Amir's wife in front of Amir's little girl, the daughter to the wife. And after that happens, Troy had enough, and they start shooting. They start demanding that the Iraqi prisoners be free. The Iraqi soldiers don't want this, and it triggers a gunfight with the Iraqi soldiers. So there's this very chaotic gunfight, very intense, and I thought this scene was very powerful because when they arrive at the bunkers, you see these people just thirsty and hungry, needing food, and they're waiting for milk. And how it's presented at first, you first see these people, you think they're the enemy. That's just how it's presented. That's how the soldiers react. They're pointing the guns at them. But you really see throughout this film, and especially in this scene, that they're just normal people who are suffering. And there's a part where this milk truck comes, and they think it's a bomb or something. They blow it up, and all this milk comes out. And it's just like, and you see all these people just gathering all this milk and just drinking it because they just needed it because they're just so thirsty, So I thought that was a very powerful scene. I thought too that I really like that when the mother got killed, especially in front of the little girl, you can tell this is a turning point for the characters. They're giving up their greed. They can just get away scot-free, but there's this ethical thing that convinces them, like, okay, morally what we're doing is not right. We need to help these people because we're soldiers and this is what we're supposed to do, which I love because in the beginning of the film you see them and they don't know what they're supposed to do. They're soldiers, but they don't know why they're here. This giving them purpose and motivation to be here to help these people. So I thought this was a very important scene, especially early on, to establish that these are characters you want to root for. So, they managed to escape the gunfight with the prisoners, and the prisoners get into the van. So they have the prisoners, the gold, and they're escaping. Just as they're escaping, the Iraqi reinforcements arrive, and they shoot off gas into the air. It's a CS gas, and so it attacks the group and all the Iraqi prisoners. And they put on try to put on gas masks, especially on the children, to try to help everyone, but it's just chaotic scene. And during this chaos scene, they all get separated, and Troy gets captured by the Iraqi soldiers, while Gates, Conrad, and Chief and the prisoners, they're rescued by a group of rebels who take them to the safety underground hideout area. So while they're in that hideout area, they agree to help the rebels and the prisoners reach the Iranian border, and they promise to give them some gold as long as they need to rescue Troy first, because Troy is captured. Again, I thought this was a very emotional scene, a very powerful scene, because it's the first time you really see the horrors of war and how this gas is just terrible and it's affecting all these people, and it's just, you see children getting affected by it, women, children getting shot. I mean, it's just a very chaotic scene. Even Conrad gets injured. I think he gets shot in his shoulder and his eye gets all messed up. So yeah, again, very powerful scene. I also like how the Iraqi prisoners and rebels, they helped out these soldiers, which show the soldiers that these are just normal people who are willing to help. They're good people. I like too how Conrad, who earlier in the film had some racist remarks with the Chief, Ice Cube's character, and just seemed like he had racist remarks against the people. He wasn't using the right language, and he seemed like he didn't care. He wasn't very likable. But after all this, you see him connect with some of the Iraqi rebels. He's watching how they're doing this Iraqi death ritual for their loved ones that have passed away, and he even asked the Chief if he can have that happen to him when he dies. He wants that death ritual, which is kind of foreshadowing for his death in the future and what makes him into such a sympathetic character, in my opinion. So then now you go to Troy, who again got taken by the Iraqi soldiers, and he's thrown in this room with a bunch of stolen cell phones. Now, I don't know why they would throw him in a room with cell phones, but it's a movie plot thing. So they get him in this room with all these cell phones. He gets one to work. He gets one to work, and he calls his wife, and who's in America, and he tells her to report his location to the army, that he's been captured, and that he needs to be rescued. And then he gets cut off when the soldiers come in, and she's crying at the other end of the phone. And so then he's interrogated and tortured by this Iraqi captain. And he explains his story, how he was living in a village and America dropped bombs on his home, and it injured his wife. His wife lost her legs, and it killed his daughter in her sleep. And after that happened, he joined Saddam's army to fight against the Americans who did this to him. And from the scene, you see that Troy understands now the horrors of war truly, and he sees it from their perspective and how horrible this just war is on both sides. And there's a scene during this where the captain asks Troy, "Do you know how it feels to lose a daughter?" And Troy says it's worse than losing your own life. And he says he's so sorry that your daughter died, and he's trying to say sorry and all that stuff. And the captain, he doesn't have sympathy for that because his daughter's dead. I mean, it's just, that's what happened. It's just a fact. And he's just so hurt by that, so he's still torturing Troy. It really shows how the war is just, these are like the pawns of the war, the kings, the presidents, the leaders, they're making all these decisions while the actual soldiers and on both sides and the people on both sides are just suffering from war. So I really like that, powerful scene that shows the perspective of both sides and how Troy is starting to understand the other side. Even though they're his enemy, he's understanding that, man, war is just, it's messed up, So then you have Gates, Conroy, and Chief after they made the agreement with the rebels to rescue Troy. The rebels take them to a group of Iraqi army deserters because they need cars. So they take them to this group where the deserters have a bunch of Saddam's luxury cars with them, and they trade their gold for those cars. And they come up with this plan to outfit the vehicles to make it appear like these are Saddam's vehicles and Saddam is in these cars. This is his entourage. They put the flags on top of the car and everything. And they want to have the Iraqi soldiers in the bunker that's holding Troy think that Saddam is coming to kill them for all the mess that's happened. This allows Gates, Conrad, and Chief the chance to free Troy from the bunker. So Gates goes in the bunker, he frees Troy and some other Iraqi prisoners that he found in the bunker that were captured. And after they leave the bunker and they have this big firefight with the Iraqi soldiers in this helicopter, they take down the helicopter, and finally the war and the fighting is over. And you see Troy, he sees Conrad, and they start running toward each other to embrace. But there's one soldier who was left alive, and he shoots Conrad and Troy. Conrad ends up dying, and Troy ends up surviving, but his lung is punctured by the shot. So, talking about these scenes, I like that the scene where they're going for the Saddam's luxury cars, it's kind of like humor in that scene because there's this whole thing where Chief and Troy are having this argument regarding if Lexus makes convertibles, and that kind of pays off in this scene. So I like the kind of levity and comedy that they included in this, and you see that sprinkled throughout the film, and I think it does a great job of setting you up for these crazy graphic war scenes because you kind of let your guard down and they hit you and they're even more powerful. To me, the most powerful scene in the film was when Gates goes to rescue Troy from the torture that he's going through, and he gives him a gun to kill the Iraqi captain who has been torturing him. But he shoots the wall instead of at the captain, and he doesn't shoot him. And I think that's a very powerful scene because it shows that Troy's understanding and seeing from that Iraqi captain's perspective and understands why he did what he did. Not saying that it was right, but he understands that, war is the horrors of war, and that this is a cycle of violence, and that both of them are just pawns in this game, and that, it's not fair what happened to Troy and especially the Iraqi rebels and all that stuff, but it's also not fair when America was bombing those Iraqi camps and they killed innocent civilians and citizens and like the Iraqi captain's daughter and wife. So he really does sympathize with them, and I like that he kind of matured to a point where he didn't want to kill him. He's done with killing, done with this this stuff, and he just wants to go home to his wife and his daughter. I think of course the scene where Troy and Conrad get shot, I think that's a very, very sad scene, but a very necessary scene, because it shows that, this is, even when there's happy scenes in this movie, war is a war, and it doesn't pause for a happy movie scene. You always have to keep your guard up, and that Iraqi soldier coming in and shooting both of them, killing Conrad, is just such a sad scene. But I love how the camera focuses on their hands grasping together, and so you see that they're there for the final moments, and Troy's telling Conrad to hold on, they're gonna be okay, and you feel like Conrad's gonna be okay, but Troy's the one that's in trouble. And because the camera focuses on Troy, you have Gates and Chief trying to work on Troy, get him, he got shot in the lungs, so they're trying to make it so he can breathe, and they're trying to do all this stuff for him. And then the camera goes back to the hands and to the Conrad, and you see that Conrad is dead. And you're like, when did that happen? And you see the hands connecting, and Troy realizes that Conrad's dead when he's holding his hand, and there's no response. So it's a very heartbreaking scene, but I think it's a very necessary scene, powerful scene, to just show the horrors of war. So then after that, Gates radios Walter and Adriana. Again, that's Jamie Kennedy's character, and the reporter, who they're in other scenes throughout this movie, but they have a very small part in the film. But he radios them to help pick him up, because they have all this gold and the rebels, and they need to go to the Iranian border so the rebels can get to safety in Iran as refugees. And Gates gives the Iranian rebels the gold that he promised them, and each rebel is given a bar of gold by Amir. And again, that's a very powerful scene, because you see how grateful they are for this money that's going to change their life from the gold. So the convoy goes to the Iranian border to escort the rebels to Iran, to protect them from the Iraqi soldiers as they're guarding the crossing. But when they arrive, there's a bunch of other American officers in helicopters that arrive from the base camp. And the reason why they're arriving is they got the message from Troy's wife. If you remember, Troy contacted his wife when he was getting tortured and told him where he was. So his wife contacted the army, and then the army realizes, oh, these 4 guys, they went AWOL, and now they're helping these rebels. So they fly over there, and they're going to arrest Gates, Troy, and Chief. Gates offers all of their gold to the American officers in exchange to helping them escort the Iraqi rebels into Iran, because as soon as Gates, Troy, and Chief got arrested, the Iraqi soldiers gathered up all the rebels and didn't let them advance. So he's Gates sacrificing all of his gold and money. He's admitting that he found the gold to the officers in exchange for helping them escort the rebels. The officers take the deal. They escort the rebels into Iran, but they say Gates, Troy, and Chief are still going to be arrested for going AWOL and disobeying orders, and they're going to be court-martialed. So again, this scene was just very powerful, because it shows that Gates, Troy, and Chief, they're willing to give up all their gold, all their riches, to help these Iraqi rebels who, days before this, they viewed them as people that they didn't treat like other human beings. They kind of walked over them while they needed help. You remember earlier in the film, they were thirsty, they needed food, and they just ignored them for the gold. Now they're giving up their gold to save their lives, which I thought was a very powerful scene. It showed the character development throughout the film that I think David O. Russell did a great job in writing these characters' development throughout this film. So I think that was a very selfless move by the characters that made them very likable. Also showed the corruption on both sides of the Iraqi and U.S. government, where the Iraqi soldiers, were the only reason they weren't, they let the Iraqi rebels go through is the threat from the U.S. government, and the only reason the U.S. government did is because they got the gold. So it shows that money rules everything, and power rules everything, and the people who suffer in these wars are the people of the nations. The Iraqi rebels, even the lower level soldiers on the U.S. and the Iraqi side. They're the ones dying. They're the ones suffering, and it was really all just about money. Also, I like there's a scene where they bring Conrad's body with them, so they can give him the traditional Iraqi death ritual that he wanted. Remember when he was injured in the underground bunker? And even the Iraqi rebels said they're going to help him with that ritual. So I thought that was a really good scene there. And so then after that, there's an epilogue where it says the film states that Gates, Troy, and Chief were cleared of the charges and honorably discharged thanks to Adriana's reporting. Because Adriana is, again, the reporter, and she was there. She got called, remember, by Gates to come pick them up. So she was there recording all this stuff. So they got honorably discharged because of that. It talks about how Gates and Chief became military advisors for Hollywood action films. So they started working in Hollywood while Troy returns to his wife and baby, and they run their own carpet store. And then it also has this little part where it says the stolen gold was returned to Kuwait, who claimed that some was missing. And this kind of implies that the rebels managed to keep their gold and it wasn't taken from the Iraqi soldiers, which is a very good ending. So again, I like that this ending was happy for all the characters, except Conrad, who obviously died. But the three main characters, they all had happy endings, and the rebels had a happy ending too, because they got into Iran safely and they got to keep their gold. It's kind of a fantasy, cheesy cop-out ending a little bit, because it fast forwards time. You don't see all this happen. You just trust the epilogue. There's not even dialogue. It's just the words on the screen. But I am just happy overall that they got a happy ending. Okay, now I'm going to go over my overall thoughts on the film itself. I feel that the theme of this movie is really perspective of war and how war affects both sides negatively, and how both sides suffer from war. Because it starts off, you're seeing it from the perspective of American soldiers. You're seeing it from their side, and they're celebrating. They're not affected by war at all. They're just celebrating, having a good time. In fact, they're wanting to get action. They're wanting to get war because they haven't experienced it. So you feel like this perspective of, war is not serious. It's not this serious thing that people make it out to be. But then you see these characters going for this gold, which again is a selfish motivation because they want to be rich and they care about themselves. But throughout this movie, these characters understand. They start to understand. They see it from the Iraqi rebels' perspective that this war is never going to end for them. It's always going to continue, because even when America takes down Saddam and after they leave, another group is going to come up and it's going to dominate them just as well. And this movie showed that, like, as soon as America felt like they won the war and they were leaving, those Iraqi soldiers were still controlling those citizens and putting them as prisoners and torturing them and interrogating them. So it just really showed the perspective of two sides, that American perspective, especially in the beginning, where the war wasn't taken seriously, and then the Iraqi people's perspective, where it's like war is their life. This is the only thing they know. I just really like the way that this movie was shot too. The cinematographer for this was Newton Thomas Siegel, and he did an amazing job with the handheld feel of this film. I mean, I think it's just really greatly shot in this film. And David O. Russell, again, did a great job directing. I know he's a controversial filmmaker for sure, and I kind of talked about that stuff earlier, and it's happened in other films too. He's considered kind of a jerk in Hollywood, but I mean, he's just a great director in terms of getting these shots, getting the acting that he got out of the actors, the script. I mean, it was just so well done in this film. I mean, this just feels like a really quality film, especially Ice Cube, who I've seen Ice Cube in a lot of other movies. Obviously, Ice Cube is a rapper, 90s hip hop rapper. Famously was in NWA in the 80s. I'm a big fan of Ice Cube, especially his 90s work once he left NWA. But he was in Boys in the Hood. I thought he was good in that. But Friday, not Daddy Daycare, but Are We There Yet? These are films where his acting ability doesn't really come off as like, oh, he's this great actor. But this is a film that I feel like he's very underrated in his role, especially if you compare it to like Tyrese in Transformers, who was more of like a comedy relief character, and it just wasn't very good. I think Ice Cube is really the MVP for me in terms of acting in this film. But I mean, George Clooney and Mark Wahlberg, who obviously are established actors, did an amazing job in this film for sure. My only complaint really is just that side story between the reporter and Jamie Kennedy's character. I don't think it was really necessary. They have some like funny moments, I guess, but I didn't really find it that funny, and kind of cut into the story, and it just didn't feel like it fit really well. But overall, the rating for this film, that I would give it a 9 out of 10. And I would recommend it to David O. Russell fans. If you're a fan of David O. Russell's films, for sure. This is one I feel like when you think of Silver Linings Playbook, I Heart Huckabees, this is one, The Fighter. This is one that is kind of underrated. Not a lot of people talk about as much, but this is a very good film, especially if you're a fan of war movies. Again, I feel like this is an underrated film that not a lot of people talk about. Especially came out around the time of like Saving Private Ryan. I think that came out in 98. So it came out around the time of a lot of other war films, but this is one that people don't really talk about. But I think it's just as, I don't know if it's as good as Saving Private Ryan, but I think it's a very good war film in itself. And then I think too, people who are fans of just the history of war and like the consequences of war, and especially like this Gulf War, which I find very interesting because it was, this war that not a lot of people talk about. It's almost a forgotten war. People talk about the Iraqi War, obviously 9/11 stuff, and then people talk about Vietnam and World War II and stuff. You see so many movies based on that stuff, but it's interesting when I think of the Gulf War, it's like this is one of the few movies I think of that's actually based on the Gulf War. So that was Three Kings. And at the end, I wanted to talk about how these films relate and how I found kind of a relationship between these films and why I chose to do these two films together. So the main reason I chose to do these two films together, one was because George Clooney was the leading actor in both films. And I thought it was interesting that in both films, especially in the posters, it's him and then two other characters next to him on these posters. And both films, interestingly enough, is about a group who's breaking the law, trying to pursue a treasure, a goal. And in the first movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, they're breaking out of prison to pursue this treasure that Everett's talking about that's gonna make them rich. And then in Three Kings, they're trying to pursue Saddam's gold billions that he stole from Kuwait. And they're breaking the law by going AWOL, by breaking the ceasefire and all this stuff to try to get this gold for their own selfish reasons to be rich. So I think that's an interesting comparable that I found that kind of relates to both films. Also, both films show that the main characters rescuing their friends. I think Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? You have Everett and Delmer. They break Pete out of prison when they find him again, and they risk they risk their lives to break Pete out of prison. Also in Three Kings, Gates, Chief, and Conrad, they rescue Troy from this torture and interrogation that he's going through after he's captured. Also, both films show main characters risking their lives to help others in need who aren't in their immediate group. What I mean by that is, in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, you have Everett, Delmer, and Pete. They're saving Tommy, the young black guitarist, who they only met, at least in the movie time, they only showed for a couple hours. They did that song with them. and they save him from the KKK. And I think that's a very powerful scene of them risking their lives to save this young black man who's playing with them, and they feel attached to, and Tommy. Similarly, in Three Kings, you have Gates, Chief, Conrad, and Troy in that beginning scene of the movie. After they get the gold, they can leave. They have the gold, they're scot-free, they can go and make their money. But after the death of Amir's wife, they choose to save those prisoners from the Iraqi soldiers and get in that gunfight that they did not have to do. And then throughout the movie, they make a lot of choices to save these Iraqi prisoners and rebels. So I think that connection is very interesting too, where you have these main characters risking their lives to help others. Also, I think both films just in general did a great job just making you feel like you're in those worlds, by just the set design, the cinematography, the realistic settings. It's like when I was watching Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, I really felt like I was in 1930s Mississippi, the Deep South. Three Kings, I felt like I was there in that Gulf War. Just the way it was shot, that documentary, handheld, kind of shaky cam at times. I just really liked the way both films were shot, and then also that fact that I found earlier that I didn't know about, which is the music. Carter Burnwell, who did the music for Three Kings, he did music for basically every Coen Brothers film except Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which is kind of interesting that I chose that film to review. So yeah, that's it for this podcast. This is my first time doing the Double Features podcast. I want to do more of these, just choosing two films that I feel like have some type of relationship with each other, and just reviewing these films, talking about them, and seeing how they relate. So again, thank you for listening. I want to come back and do more album reviews, movie reviews, top 10 list. So keep looking out for that. Thanks so much, and peace out.